Well, you want to cut spending without destroying defense? Well, talk to Tom Coburn. The Republican senator found $68 million in spending cuts that just might save jobs. For example, did you know that the Navy spent $5 million figuring out what lessons fish can teach about democracy and social decision-making? Fish? I had no idea. Or that the Pentagon teamed up with the USDA to create a video called Grill It Safe. It features grill sergeants showing off their recipes. It's the kind of stuff that gets Republican Senator Tom Coburn all fired up. He's here now with how we get all the spending down. Senator, good to have you.
Hey, Neil.
With just a mild overview that you were doing here, you came upon a lot of stuff. And this is the type of duplication the president was long below. We're going to get to that in a second. But all of this dwarfs whatever we're kvetching about coming on Friday.
Well, you know, I have a fundamental disagreement with the president on the amount of duplication that's in the federal government and the amount of waste. Government agencies aren't necessarily the most efficient organizations in the world, but it's certainly easy to highlight stupidity in terms of how they spend some of the money. You could eliminate all the stupidity and wouldn't solve our problems with this sequester. But it does beg the question is who's running these organizations that continue to allow money to be wasted the way it is? And so we ought to be asking the hard questions.
Now, when you went through a lot of this duplication and you know, even as I'm looking now for the Pentagon to develop some roll-ups, beef jerky roll-ups, I mean, maybe if you like beef jerky, that's a fine idea. But why wasn't this part of a backup spending cut plan in lieu of these sequestration cuts? Because I think most people, most rational people of either party, of both parties, could agree this is easier stuff to go after than the stuff they're supposedly going after now that you would think all but cripples humanity.
Yeah, I think it's all about leadership and priorities in agencies. You know, the president can offer lots of things to the Congress on things he'd like to change, and we'll deal with it and offer legislation to do that. You know, this has been going on for 18 months. The president's known that we were under a sequester. The whole idea was not to ever get here, but the fact is we are here, and we need to make these cuts, and how we make them is important in terms of the amount of pain that people are going to feel. And what we ought to do is give the administration as much flexibility as we can for them to make these cuts. But remember, the government's twice the size it was 11 years ago, and this is 2.25% of the total government, but it's really a 7% or so in the discretionary, maybe 11% in the Pentagon over the next 10 years. But even with these cuts, we'll still be spending more money in the next year than we're spending today. And so the question ought to be, the American people ought to be asking is, are we getting value for the money that we're spending? And the answer to that is half the time, no. And number two is, are we spending our money, the first dollar, on the thing that's first important for the country? And the answer to that oftentimes is no.
You know what you've always pointed out, and you've been like a dog with a bone on this over the years, Senator, is that, you know, this idea that waste, fraud, abuse, duplication is just chump change is wrong. That
it is wrong.
Before you start going after some of these more substantive cuts and all, the reality is that there's a lot that in this duplication, in this silliness, that when you add it up, you're doing a lot of cutting.
Yeah, well, the GAO, just through the first two reports that they've come out, you know, over 3 years now, we're going to have a total review of the federal government on duplication. Out of the first two reports, the first 2 years, we have $380-some billion in programs that have duplication within them. And it's easy, in my mind, now I think the president would disagree with me, in my mind, to get rid of $50 billion right there a year.
Yeah.
You know, we have 57 job training programs, all but 3 of them do the same thing that the others do. There's no metrics on it. The president, when he speaks about that, thinks we should clean that up, but we should spend the same amount of money. I think we should clean it up and spend half as much money. So I think there's things we can do, and that's $9 billion a year. That's $90 billion over 10 years. You find 20 more of those, you got this.
You got some serious stuff.
And it's easy.
Yeah. Senator, what I like
hard
about what you're coming up with is, as a Republican, You had no sacred cows. You looked at defense. You looked at overlap there. And to your credit, you're saying all is fair game. Very good having you, Senator. Be well.
Good to be with you, Neil.
All
Take
right,
care.
Senator
God
Coburn.
bless you.
All right, now to